Yeah, Talaman, Geek Talk. Let's enjoy the show. Talaman always got a plan. Geek Talk is popping where it's really at. Represents geek culture, homie got structure. Sometimes it's vulgar, screw catch culture. Feel like Luffy, smart to say the least. Loving One Piece, man, really loves to eat. Everybody knows the show is really is Talaman. You know what time it is. Let's go, Geek Talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Geek Talk with Tyler. As always, I'm your host Tyler. Today I'll be joined by my co-host Jeremy Bryan. How you do today?
Doing good. How you doing, Tiger?
Doing pretty good. Before we go any further, you want to tell a bit about yourself? Who you are, what you do, where people can find you?
Sure. I feel like Mary Jane Watson asking you how you doing, Tiger. But I am Jeremy Bryant. I am the host of Paranormal: The New Normal, co-host of Maniacal Music Musings, Global Strangeness, and Bracket Bastards podcasts.
Awesome. Although for the record, it's Tyler, Tyler, but no harm,
Uh,
no foul.
uh, I I assume, but I mean your name is Tiger on the thing, so
On Discord, just an alias. But
yes, on
regardless,
Discord. Uh,
we're here to talk about the indie genre of musics. Since you have a little more familiarity with this topic than I do, what exactly separates the indie music genres from the mainstream music genres?
Well, I mean, by definition, just how popular they are, and just how well known the act is. Because, I mean, compare it to Taylor Swift versus, say, Insane Clown Posse. Everybody knows who in the world knows who Taylor Swift is. Everybody's heard at least one of her songs at one point or another. But you go with a band like Insane Clown Posse, and though they may be very popular and be known by a lot of people, they're not worldwide known. There are plenty of people in the world who never even knew they existed or still exist. So it's I mean, the definition of mainstream is it's mainstream. It's something everybody in the world knows about.
Well, what about the genres as something you brought up? Like, what's an indie genre?
I would say symphonic metal is a symphonic metal. I mean, there's a lot of metal genres that are indie because they're newer or not. Some of them aren't even new. I mean, symphonic metal's 40 years old for God's sakes, but it's just something that not everybody has heard in their life, or if they have heard it, they don't realize that's the genre they're listening to. I mean, hardcore rap would be the same thing. A lot of people never listen to a hardcore rap song because they never knew it existed. Or, I mean, they may have heard some of the earliest ones in the 90s, but they didn't consider it hardcore rap because it really wasn't. It's just classification they gave it at that point because they didn't know they wanted to be able to claim it was one of the first in a couple years down the road. But so I mean, it's I mean, same thing. I mean, with the genres, there's a lot more too. I mean, look at I'm trying to think of the right name for it even, but I mean, the genre that like Grateful Dead or Fish would be in. I mean, there's a lot of names for it. Stoner rock or acid rock, but I mean, jam bands, I guess would be another name of the genre. But they were for a long time. People didn't hear them unless they went out searching for them. I mean, a lot of the genres that were like this back in the 70s and 80s got kind of became more popular when the internet became a thing and people could hear different types of music at a finger click. So,
Well, how many views, or I guess, how many people would have to know of this particular genre where something have to be indie or mainstream?
I mean, there's no definitive measure by any means because this isn't something that people just go around trying to classify things as. But I mean, if you have, I mean, a lot. I have a couple people I know who they judge things. They judge artists on Spotify by how many monthly listeners they have according to their Spotify page. And I've listened to bands where they have less than 1,000 monthly listeners on their Spotify page. Doesn't mean they're bad music. Doesn't mean the music's not enjoyable. Just means people haven't discovered them yet, which would make them indie.
Well, as a comic buff, there are several well known titles that are still technically indie comics because they don't really align themselves with DC or Marvel. Comics including Hellboy or the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are still technically indie comics because they don't align with either franchise.
Well, I think okay. Well, if you want to go by comic books, because I do have thousands and thousands of comic books in my collection, and I know comics as well. And if you want to go by like the indie comics definition of it, then indie in comics just means they're not put out by one of the main publishers of comics, whether it be Marvel, DC, or I guess even Image is considered a main
Actually, it's
publisher
just Marvel and
nowadays.
DC.
But
Even Image
I mean,
is still technically an indie comic. Like if we're gonna go by
I
the
don't
best
feel like that's the
selling,
case.
yeah, but if you're gonna go to anybody on the
I
street
mean,
who's not a big comic buff and ask them to name 5 superheroes, they're probably gonna tell you either a bunch of DC or Marvel characters. You may get a Turtle or two, or Hellboy, or Spawn, but that's gonna be a very rare case, especially with all the movies that are being
and
produced by both
perfect.
Marvel and DC.
Oh, actually, well, luckily, both of those studios are slowing down a little bit on how many movies they put out a year just to try to make better movies because they finally are listening to the audience. But it's and isn't Image owned by DC now? If I'm not mistaken, or am I thinking of Vertigo?
You might be thinking of Vertigo. Image is still very much its own thing. But I do know that Dark Horse is
Okay,
the third best selling comic franchise of all time. At least in
yeah. I don't know how I
America.
forgot about Dark Horse.
If we're talking globally,
I mean, I
then that honor would have to go to
yeah,
Shueisha. Because if we're going by the four
yeah. I was
best
gonna say it
selling
has to be a
comics,
Asian one.
then it's Spider-Man taking the 4th spot, Spadman taking the 3rd spot, One Piece taking the 2nd spot, and Superman taking the 1st spot, believe it or not.
I can believe it. It's Superman. Come on now, I can believe it. I'm not even that big a Superman fan, but I can believe it.
But would you believe a series that hasn't been running for a full 30 years was managed to beat the likes of Batman and Superman? Or Spider-Man?
Yeah, I can.
I mean, it's true
Because I
that
mean,
Superman was
I'll,
the
I
trendsetter for all modern superheroes. But
oh yeah, the cape, the underwear, and the outside, the typical superhero setup.
the protect the innocent spiel.
Mhm.
But would you
Yeah, which is honestly, I
consider?
mean, that's also why I'm not the
I'm sorry, you're not what?
that I was saying that's why I'm not the biggest fan of Superman. And I mean, I'm not even that big a Batman fan. When I read comics, the only DC comics I read were pretty much Justice League and Justice Society type of comics. I didn't read like the individual heroes per se. I did that more for Marvel, but because I mean, I don't know. Superman is just too Boy Scout for me sometimes. I mean, I like some of the darker storylines they do where he's not as morally perfect, but it's just the idea of a superhero being a perfect Boy Scout, like even Captain America had some skeletons in his closet throughout the year.
I
So
mean, didn't he get his
I
powers
don't
through
like the
drugs,
idea of a
basically? I
through
mean,
drugs.
well, think about it. He got this super serum, which is basically code for steroids. So, I mean, if you have to rely on that to bulk you
I
up,
mean, yeah,
I mean, at least when Batman has
well, I mean,
human physiology, he worked at it. Captain America was just given juice.
well, basically, I mean, it's a little different than steroids and predate steroids by many years, but I mean, it's more of a scientific concoction. It's more of like a mad scientist type of storyline than anything else. I mean, it's almost more Sen Frankenstein style than like juicing style in a way.
But most comparatively, it does the same job as
Now,
steroids job does. Only it would probably be
well,
more long
I mean,
term.
kind of. I mean, if you want to talk about a comic book figure that is comparative to juicing, I would say Bane.
Yeah, okay. That's fair. That's fair.
Because Bane is just like juicing. Bane has to constantly be filling himself with this concoction to help him keep his physique up. Well, Captain America, it was an experiment, and he only had to do it once. Well, he's done it a couple times because he's had his powers taken away by various villains, Red Skull most of all. But so I mean, he's had to use it multiple times just to function. But other than that, like, it's always been a long-term thing. He never loses it unless somebody finds a concoction to take it away from him.
Okay, that's a fair point, but getting sidetracked aside, we do need to bring back a...
Yeah, my bad. You brought up comics.
No, it's fine. I kind of steered us in the wrong direction, or I guess arguably right one. I'll leave the viewers to decide that. But does indie music all apply specifically to the lyrical side, or does it apply to the instrumental side as well?
I mean, instrumental side has always been kind of more indie, I guess, because most people, myself included, don't really like music that doesn't have lyrics, that doesn't have voices in it. Like, I can listen to a good instrumental because I'm a huge symphonic metal fan, so listening to instrumentals is definitely key to that, because there are usually at least one or two on every album. But I'm not gonna listen to a whole album that has instrumentals, because it's just, to me, maybe in the background of a party or something, then yeah, sure. But I'm not gonna do it while I'm driving, because it seems like it'd be boring to me. I mean, unless you're one of those people who really can enjoy it. Like, if you can enjoy jazz to the point where, hey, like, you're without lyrics, like jazz without lyrics, where you're just bopping along to it, like, then that's different. But I don't enjoy it personally, so I guess that would be indie music, kind of, because less people are listening to it.
Well, I mean, jazz was popular. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that really depend on where you are? Like, okay, I'm going to bring back to comics and manga for a second. One Piece is not as popular in the States as it would be in Japan. So do you think location has something to do with the indie versus mainstream topic here we got going on?
I don't fully believe it does, though, because every country on Earth produces music of their own from that origin, that is either they have their instrumental bands and they have their regular bands with a singer, just like every other country. I mean, you go to Africa, I've heard African music that's just pure instrumental, and I've also heard African music where there's beautiful singers singing along with it. Even if I can't understand what they're saying, I still think it's beautiful from those sounds they're making.
Well, I mean, as somebody that's a big fan of J and K-pop, it really doesn't matter what the words are per se, as long as it's got a good melody and rhythm to it. Like, there's actually a South Park episode that kind of does this. It was the Fun Times with Good Weapons or something, where all the boys get ninja tools and they start becoming ninjas.
Oh, I
Yeah,
am very familiar with the episode. I am a huge South Park fan. But hey, now let's go protect my balls.
Right, let me get to the point.
I fucking love that song.
If you actually see the lyrics to that song, the English version, it really doesn't make any sense to it, but it's still pretty catchy. So I think that has something to factor
You're not
in
wrong.
when
You're
we're
not
talking about mainstream versus indie, of just overall what really grabs an audience's attention.
Yeah, I mean, but when it comes to music, I think that, like I said, the difference between indie and mainstream is just solely the amount of people listening to it, because it's about whether you're known or not. I mean, and I guess you could break it down to, if you want to go the comic route, you could break it down by, it's not put out by one of the main labels out there. I mean, rap's a great example of that. People for a long time, people didn't hear rap music unless it was released by Death Row or any of the other big ones I can't think of right now. But unless it was released by a big label in the '90s, like rap really didn't get out there because these were the labels had the money to get out there on MTV and all the other channels that played music videos. Like they didn't. All these small labels, like say Strange Music, say Psychopathic Records, say say LSP, Lyrical Snuff Productions, say Serial Killing Records, SKR. Like these smaller record labels didn't have the means to get their music out there. They couldn't even get radio play because they didn't have the money to pay the radio station to play it.
Well, I think it's been established that rap is a more mainstream genre of music, but are we talking 90s rap or are we talking present day rap?
I mean, it definitely was more prevalent with indie rap artists not getting out there in the '90s more because it was just there was less ways to do it. I mean, nowadays you have the internet, and that's Spotify and the internet have given a great boost to all indie artists because anybody can put their music on Spotify and hope that people hear it.
Well, let me ask you something. Now that we
I mean,
have
people.
access,
I know people that.
now that we have access to the internet through means of YouTube Music, Spotify, or whatever device you're using, do you believe indie music still exists? Because we now have the terms and means to discover it?
Yeah, I think it still does exist because just because we have the means to discover it doesn't mean that it's going to get discovered in a quick fashion at all. I mean, there are still people on. I've had people on. I run a music podcast. I've had artists on my podcast that if you go to their Spotify page, they have less than 1,000 monthly listeners. They have songs with only a couple hundred listens, and the songs have been out for 5, 6 years, maybe, or even more sometimes. I mean, it's just because you're out there doesn't mean people are going to discover you. There's so much out there now that it makes it almost a little bit harder to get discovered because there's so many different options now, and unless people are hearing about you through either word of mouth or through advertisements on social media, they really are not going to be. How are they going to find you? They'd have to actually literally know the artist's name to go search the artist. I mean, yeah, sure, they could put on a random playlist that Spotify or YouTube Music offers, but there are still algorithms in those playlists are still going to play more popular music before you get to the music that's lesser known.
Well, that's an excellent point you bring up, but I think the best way is how do we make music more well known? Obviously, hashtags are a great way to make any product more well known. But in terms of music, that's arguably going to be a little more trickier.
It really is. And the only way these days, if you really want to get like an artist that you love to be more well known, if they're not known already, because a lot of people still love artists that are well known. But if you want to get like an artist that you know out there, you have to share their music out to your friends, share their music out to your social media pages, and that's still not get people to listen, but it may get one. It's not get at least one or two people to give it a listen if they're really your friends and they really like take your advice and trust your judgment on taste. Then they will probably give it a check it out, and either they're going to like it and they might go explore more into this artist, or they're not going to really like it and they'll just disregard it and not think about it ever again, probably. But so I mean, it's always a tricky thing. It's the same in podcasting, as I'm sure you know. Like to get your podcast out there, you have to guest in other podcasts and promote yourself. You have to share your stuff out on social media like crazy on multiple platforms to get known. You have to join alliances with other podcasters, join networks to get your name out there, because just anybody can do a podcast. It's true. Anybody can do a podcast.
In theory,
but to get yourself known, you have to make, in theory.
Like, this is just
anybody can go on a computer.
If you're going to be a podcaster, you need to have some sort of ability to make small talk with whomever you're speaking with, even if it's just yourself.
100%, which I mean, it's funny because I say that in my show all the time. Like, I don't do episodes where it's just me talking to myself, because I wouldn't want to hear myself talk to myself for an hour. So, I mean, that's my personal feeling on it as far as myself goes. But I have listened to podcasters where they talk to themselves for an hour, and it can be entertaining. But I prefer to have guests because I like the small talk. I've always been a good small talker. I've always been able to make conversation with anybody at a bar or at a party. I always been able to make conversation with anybody just because I'm good at it. It came naturally to me as a kid. So that's why I have so many podcasts, is because I started a couple and I kept getting asked to join more because people like to have me around to talk to.
Well said. And it's funny that you mentioned that. One time, my sister and I actually did get into a heated argument. One thing led to another, and my sister's like, "Oh my God, everything on your Facebook page is about your fucking podcast." It's like, yeah, because I'm trying to promote myself and get my name out there. Everything you post is about your kid, who I love to death. But seriously, put something else on there.
Well, it's funny because I've gotten into that same argument with different family members of my family too, wife included, because they just don't understand. Like, it's going to be all about your podcast for the most part, or your friend's podcast, because you have to promote. I mean, if you don't promote, you can put out 1,000 episodes. Doesn't mean anybody's going to listen if they don't know it exists. Same with music. No one's going to listen if they don't know it exists.
So it'll be a phantom episode if it doesn't get promoted.
I mean, trust me, I've had episodes come out and like I just clear blue, like I knew it came out, but then I just got busy and I forgot to ever share it out that day or that next day. And a week later, I'm like, why is this episode of no listens? And I'm like, I never shared it out. Oh my God. And I'll have to go back and like fix my error and share it out completely on everything so that people start listening. Because I mean, yeah, I do have on both my podcasts that I actually run and edit. I have listeners that will listen to every episode like this. I can see the same number, the same date episode releases every time, but it's nowhere near as high as I want it to be. And I have to share it out to get new people to listen in. Hopefully they find an episode when I'm sharing it out that they like enough that makes them want to go back and listen to the old stuff.
Well, let me ask you something. When we're talking, do you believe with this cancel woke culture that artists are having difficulty creating new content?
No. Well, okay. Yeah. This is actually a topic I freaking love, but I hate woke culture. I hate cancel culture with a passion. One of my episodes of Paranormal New Normal, me and a guest actually talked about this for a good half hour. But, and yes, I mean, because of things I've said, because I talk out of my ass sometimes. I'm a human, and I don't think before I speak sometimes because I'm a guy. And I mean, I've lost podcast friends. I've lost friends in real life because of things I've said. I've turned people away from my podcast because of things I said. I've had people leave me reviews saying like, "Why would you ever say that?" And I'm just like, "Sorry, it happened. If I thought it was bad enough, I would have edited it out, but I obviously didn't think it was bad enough to edit out. So it's an opinion. Guess what? Opinions are allowed. Whether you agree with them or not, a person's allowed to have opinions. You don't have to agree with it. No one said you do, but we're allowed to have them.
I mean, if people are trying to force you to be something they're not, then clearly you don't want them as listeners. That's just my point of view.
I mean, exactly. When people leave reviews for me that like are not really like bad but are neutral, and it's like they're complaining about how much my dogs are barking in the background, or I even had someone complain that because I smoke cigarettes on my podcast all the time because I'm a smoker, and I've had people complain that like me moving around smoking cigarettes like distracts them from listening to the podcast, which doesn't make a lick of sense to me. But like those ones I'll ignore. But I mean, I moved my podcasting area because my dogs were getting in the way of my recordings. I could hear it when I was editing them, and I wanted to change it because it was getting to a point where you could barely hear us at some points because of the dogs. So to me, that's more the criticism I'm willing to take. But if you're going to come at me because of something I said that you don't agree with it, then don't listen. I'm not going to change who I am for one listener. That's not going to happen.
Well, so I think this was another South Park topic. It was like this two-parter for Muhammad, the Family Guy Wars. Like, if something gets canceled, then why don't we just start canceling everything and start appeasing everybody? Of course, because Comedy Central,
I
they
mean,
didn't allow it to air, which is kind of hypocritical if you ask me.
mhm. I mean, it's the same thing with the Michael Jackson episode of The Simpsons. Like they don't air it anymore. It's not on Disney Plus with all the other Simpsons episodes because because of criticism and because Michael Jackson was being accused of things that right after that episode dropped. Like, but still, and it's the same with Family Guy with the Lois Gets an Abortion episode, which they do not allow that to air because it touches on a hot topic for the last couple decades. So I mean, it's just. I mean, I understand why. I mean, I understand why Matt and Trey were let Comedy Central take that down because they couldn't let Comedy Central. They couldn't lose what they have with Comedy Central because of that one issue. They sometimes you have to have some morals and just be like, okay, we might have gone a little too far here. Maybe we didn't even, but people are having a problem with it. We need to back off it for a minute and just let it disappear and get forgotten about so we can move on and do what we want to do with our careers.
And it's funny, you mentioned both abortions and Michael Jackson. Both of these were episodes that South Park have covered. Twice for Michael Jackson.
Yeah, South Park.
Where they first meet Michael Jackson, and the second time with all the dead celebrities, and the abortion with the dead Gino was twice in South Park with the abortion. First, where
it was.
Yeah, it was Cartman finds a whole bunch of undead fetuses, and it was the whole Kenny dying episode, so they think they were going to save him, but it turns out Cartman was just using the fetuses to make his own shakies, because South Park logic. And the other time was when Garrison becomes Mrs. Garrison, and she realized that she wasn't having her period, so she thought she was pregnant, and she wanted to get an abortion.
Yeah, I do remember both those. I think, well, the Michael Jackson thing on Simpsons happened in the early '90s, right when all this was big news. South Park didn't really hit on Michael Jackson until it'd been a dilemma story for like a decade at that point, and South Park has always been able to get away with more things because it's Comedy Central. It's not Fox, which is Fox. Everybody knows how Fox is. So Fox is pure Republican conservative. So I mean, Simpsons and any other Fox show have to be careful. Well, I mean, Disney is supposed to be conservative morals too. So
are they?
I mean, they're more woke. Disney is because they have to, because they don't want public outcry if they don't. That's the only reason they have. I'm sure the heads of Disney are not exactly loving it, but they're doing it, one, to get more people to watch their movies because they're including these people that usually didn't watch these movies because they didn't have any representation in them. I know plenty of people who will talk about that in length, that they never had representation in movies when they were kids because every character in these movies was white as snow. So it's just, I don't know. We're at a crossroads in the world right now with the woke culture, and I mean, cancel culture kind of is going away slowly. It's gotten a lot better than it was 10 years ago, that's for sure. But the wokeness is never going to go away because, I mean, yes, I agree to some degree we need to be woke in this world, like a little bit. Like people need to realize there were things that happened in the past that were wrong, and that there are things still going on that need to be corrected. But does it need to be shoved down our throats at every turn, at every corner? No, I don't think so.
I mean, honestly, Atlantis did it properly when they brought in a diverse cast. But what Disney, in my opinion, or the other streaming services are doing wrong is that they're highlighting that they have, oh, check out our black friends. Or, hey, check out our LGBTQ stories. It's like, okay, but what does it bring to the table?
I mean, it doesn't really, no. And I mean, comic books have been doing the same thing now for the last 15, 20 years. They've been making it more inclusive completely. I mean, I'm trying to think of, I mean, they created Miles Morales, a African-American Spider-Man. They created a Middle Eastern Miss Marvel. And I mean, they created, which I'm fine with all that.
To be fair to Miles Morales, even though he was another Spider-Man, he was still his own character in his own right. But it just feels like a lot of times that when characters are recolored, they're just recolored for the point of representation. Like, the Little Mermaid reboot was a perfect example of such.
Well, actually, as a paranormal podcaster and a lover of the paranormal, the idea of mermaids, which is a paranormal topic, completely. Mermaids, yes, they were seen all over the world at one point, and they still are to some degree. There are still reports of people seeing them, but it's usually in the biggest hot pockets of the sightings are in South America or off Africa or in the Mediterranean, which all those areas would have darker skinned creatures, regardless if they're any sort of humanoid and any type of human type skin, because the people down that south of the equator are darker skinned because of how close they are to the sun.
Well,
Or how
that's
much
just an
hotter the sun
example.
gets there.
Or, okay, Snow White would be another example. She's going to be played by a Hispanic woman, even though her description is her skin was as fair as snow.
Yeah, I mean that one I can't defend. I really can't defend that
No one
one, and I
defends
don't
it.
want to. It's, I mean, it's just it's the same. I mean, not even Disney, but it's the same thing when Marvel before Disney bought them, or actually, well, it was Sony because Disney did buy Marvel right at that point, but it was Sony Marvel when they made the Human Torch African American. He is supposed to be Susan Storm's brother. How? And I mean, yeah, you can play off the whole adopted brother card, but I mean, no, that's not comic book accurate, and it's not about the race to me even. It's just keep it comic book accurate if you're going to make things based on a IP, based on a already pre-existing idea. Keep them accurate to the pre-existing idea. That's what the fans of the actual IP want to see. They don't want to see something that you changed up just because you could.
Although, to be fair, every person that's ever played the Human Torch in the live-action movies went off to play better Marvel characters in the MCU.
I mean, yeah, it's been a stepping stone of sorts. I mean, we'll see if that happens with the new Fantastic Four, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like putting Michael B. Jordan as Human Torch was kind of. I mean, I never even watched that movie because that movie looks so stupid compared to the original two that came out through Sony. I mean, My Human Storm.
We do
I mean, my
spend on making Fantastic Four movies. We could actually make a living Fantastic Four.
I mean, possibly. If it is possible at all, then yes, we had enough money to do it by now. That's for damn sure. But I mean, it's just my Human Torch will always be Chris Evans. Like he made that role so perfect to the Giant Storm in the comic books. The new guy looks too serious to do that, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
And as long as we're not getting John Krasinski, Mr. Fantastic, then I think we're in the clear.
I was so against that too. I'm happy they finally appeased everybody by doing it in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, just to have him put on the costume once and make everybody happy. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about Pedro Pascal playing Mr. Fantastic either, but I mean it's Pedro Pascal, and I'll give him a freaking chance to do it and impress me because he's Pedro Pascal. But
yes, but
he's done no wrong by us nerd cultures.
No, but I mean, indie characters, indie music aside, or not indie music, but in characters aside, do you think new music just starts off indie or becomes mainstream like that? Or like, do you believe, say, okay, someone with a big name as like say Billy Joel, he's got a lot of hit songs. We Didn't Start the Fire, Piano Man. Do you believe some of his songs are indie because they're not as well known as his more well known songs?
Well, actually, we did a bracket. We did part of the Rolling Stone bracket last night on my show because we're 6 parts into it out of 25 parts because we're doing the top 500 songs in 34 song brackets, and we're basically breaking it down until we get to one winner eventually in a grand winner tournament. And one of my guests last night used the term greatest hits artist. I mean, he tried using it with Elton John, and I wanted to smack him for it. But there are such artists that are greatest hit artists. That is true. They do exist where they're famous for their hits, and the rest of their music, most people generally won't know. And if they hear it at some point and someone's like, oh, this is so and so, they're going to be like, wait, I've never heard this song. I mean, basically any artist is a greatest hits artist until you deep dive on them. I mean, unless you listen to every album they ever put out in full, they're always going to be a greatest hits artist to you because it's your greatest hits that they did. It doesn't even have to be the greatest hits that the record label calls it and puts out on an actual album. It could just be your greatest hits for that artist, and that's all they're going to be to you until you listen to them in full. I mean, I have several artists that I have certain songs I like, and I put those in my mix on Spotify, and other ones I have full CDs of every CD they've done on my Spotify liked list because I love everything they've done. It's a personal thing at that point. It's not even really. So no, I don't think it makes them indie if they only have a couple hits that people like or people listen to on a regular basis because that's not indie. That's just that person's prerogative.
Okay, well said. And I think this is a good point to leave off. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me today.
Of course, man. It was my pleasure.
One more time, tell the audience who you are, what you do, and where they can find you.
Well, folks, if you want to see any of the live streams I do on a regular basis, which I'm almost on a daily basis at most weeks, you can check out Uncensored, Unapologetic, and Untamed Podcast Collective Facebook group, YouCubed. You can also check out me on X and Instagram as @JugglerBastard. I do live stream both those locations too. Usually Instagram's a little bit harder to work with because it's new to that. And you can also find all my previous live videos on YouTube as any of the podcast names, Paranormal Normal or Maniacal Music Musings.
Terrific. And this has been Geek Talk with Tyler. Stay tuned for more geeky episodes. And if you like this episode, feel free to hit like, subscribe, and feel free to follow the content of your host and his guest. But no matter what you do, remember, stay geeky.